Okay, I'd like to offer this presentation up as an introduction to the philosophy of Martha Nussbaum. Our class has been working through a series of interviews that Astra Taylor conducted with contemporary philosophers, and this is the third one that we've done a presentation of from that series. The topic for the interview is the subject of justice, and Nussbaum is known, among other things, for her capabilities theory of justice. So we want to present that and comment on it a little bit, and we also want to give some background by looking at social contract theory and some of the shortcomings that Nussbaum found with that theory. I'd like to start with a quick look at the difference between Plato and Aristotle on the subject of justice. So this is really a very brief summary. It's hard to talk about justice without making some mention of Plato's masterwork, I think you could say, the Republic, which in the ancient world first raised the question, what is justice? And you could say the Republic, that was the guiding question of the Republic, and in it Plato and his companions, Socrates and his companions, attempted to build an ideal state in thought. And the ideal state would be one in which they would see it would have to be one that included justice, and then you could have a clearer vision of what justice was. So in Plato's view, he thought of justice as a virtue, one of the important virtues, and justice was something that could be applied either to an individual person or to a state. And in either case, justice was a kind of internal arrangement of the parts, a harmonious arrangement of the parts that made it possible for the whole to become what it was intended to be. So, or a kind of internal harmony of the parts in favor of what was best for realizing the true nature of the whole. Aristotle followed Plato, and in the Politics, in his view of justice, he endorses a political arrangement within which all the citizens were able to develop themselves and have good, happy, flourishing lives. It's not easy to, you can say easy things, but it's hard to distinguish between these two. One commentator that I looked at has summed up the difference between the two. In his view, Plato's emphasis was on duties, that everybody in a state had a kind of obligations that they needed to recognize and roles that they needed to fulfill for the state to be what it was supposed to be a just state. So his emphasis was on duties for the sake of the whole, to the whole. Aristotle's emphasis was more on the rights of the individual citizens, and the aim of this was to enable the citizens to have happy and flourishing lives. And in a way, the aim is the same in both cases. It's to allow the true nature of things to be actualized, to be realized. the measure in Aristotle was happiness. So he wanted to try and make sure that everything was available that would enable citizens to have happy, uh, fulfilling lives. We spoke about Plato and Aristotle on the previous slide. I mean, primarily because Martha Nussbaum is going to appeal to Aristotle in particular as the inspiration for her own capabilities approach to social justice. The next major theory that is relevant to our discussion here is social contract theory. And we can say this was in the social contract theories became popular in the 17th and 18th century. And there were different versions of them. Thinkers like Thomas Hobbes, John Locke, and J.J. Rousseau all came up with different versions of social contract theories. In a way, they were all attempts to correct the inequalities of the medieval world, or you could say the remnants of the feudal societies with their inherited worth and inherited wealth and power that were that kind of social organization. There was a need to move beyond that. In order to do that, each of the theorists tried to imagine, speculated in some way what life would have been like prior to the existence of any kind of civilized society at all. So where did order come from in the first place? In their speculations, their imaginations, they imagined a state of nature before the actualization of any kind of civilization. In the state of nature, that meant that there was also prior to any morality as well. So in the state of nature, it was assumed that everybody was free to do whatever they wanted and be guided by basic instincts. Everybody was free to do whatever they thought was necessary to preserve their own existence. So a lot of freedom is nice, but because there was no law or order in the state of nature, the end result was that it was a very difficult life for people. And it's described in Hobbes, at least, as like the state of nature was a constant state of war, where each one had to struggle against all in order to survive and have the life that they wanted. As Hobbes put it, such an existence was solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and ultimately short. The state of nature as a state of war gave a picture of what life was like prior to the existence of any civilization. And it was not a pretty picture. But it's also has to be taken into account that human beings were rational creatures. They might be slow on the uptake, but they could be rational given some time. And they would have recognized the undesirability of the situation that they found themselves in. And it looks like it's kind of obvious that one of the solutions to try and alleviate the difficulties of life would be to try to gather together, with others and to form some sort of agreement that would establish a set of rules that would enable everyone to live together in relative, at least, peace and harmony. And it was this agreement that the speculation sort of put out there was the idea that there had been some kind of social contract that people entered into in order to improve the quality of their existence. Everyone, in order to enter into such a contract, would have had to sacrifice or give up some of their individual freedoms, which they would have been willing to do because it would become clear that you give up some freedoms, but you gain so much more in the exchange that it's a deal that you wouldn't mind making so much. So it could be said that people entered into the social contract for their mutual advantage. They made this sacrifice, gave up some of their individual freedoms, but in the process they gained security and the ability to focus their attention and their efforts in directions that would benefit everybody taken together. Such an agreement, I mean, it's still speculation. So you could say it looks like something like that happened at some point. And when it did happen, it surely would have been a dramatic step forward for the development of civilizations. And so much more becomes possible when you don't have to spend all your time trying to meet your basic needs and protect yourselves from others. So social contract theories answered some of the questions people had about where the higher authority of governments and morality, came from originally. And according to social contract theory, they weren't handed down from God. There was, as far as governments or monarchs were concerned, there was no such thing as the divine right of kings bestowed on kings from God. But according to social contract theory, the origin of government and the origin of morality came from the people themselves. When people came together and set rules, for living together so that everybody could thrive and have good lives. This theory, this way of thinking about government and also about morality, was a major step in the direction of democratic forms of governments. You could say there was a need for new forms of social organization coming out of the medieval world and sort of entering into the early modern world. So it was a major step in the direction of democratic forms of government. And when people wanted to free themselves from the old orders of things, I mean, you needed to have some sort of theoretical foundation to argue from. So social contract theory provided that. So it provided more equitable arrangements in terms of justice. It did help people move in the direction of democratic forms of government in particular. It worked to eliminate inherited advantages or class privileges that existed in the older orders. And again, I mean, it provided intellectual arguments for switching from rule by a monarch to a more democratic form of government. You can see these theories were employed in both justifications of the United States Revolution, War of Independence, and the French Revolution for independence as well. So social contract theories did help us move forward historically into more representative forms of government, which gave us more freedoms and gave us more opportunities. Uh, but there were some areas in which social contract theories didn't help us so much, and Nussbaum is willing to give credit for the good things that social contract theories did, but she also points out uh, some places where maybe the theories caused us some other problems. For one thing, she indicates that the model made some pretty basic assumptions about the kind of people who were participants in the formation of the contracts. In the state of nature, it was assumed that everybody was pretty equal in terms of bodily strength and mental capacities. In particular, you could say, I mean, the basic assumption was that all the participants to the contract were males with relatively equal physical abilities, adult males. But as we know, and as became more apparent as time went on, women who are typically weaker physically uh, and not to even mention, that those uh, people in society who were disabled. So these groups of people didn't really have much of a voice in what people thought that the contract would have indicated. So they weren't given an equal place in the society formed by it. So that's still a problem that Nussbaum would like to try to address. Nussbaum asked, how can we fix this problem? It could be said that the progress has already been made with respect to the consideration of women. Much has been accomplished. But how do we address the inequalities, the physical and mental inequalities that are still exist in our society that aren't sort of included in any of the current versions of the social contract theory? And she argues that really we should care about this because it's a problem for all of us when we're young, when we're children. We don't have the physical uh, or maybe even the mental sort of qualifications that we might have when we become mature adults. And again, as we age, as we get older, that our faculties are likely to decline as well. So these are still problem areas, and there's a question as to how we can think about them in such a way as to come up with a better solution. She identifies three groups in particular that she feels are left out if we're just stuck with the social contract model. And those are, first of all, people with disabilities. And again, I mean, this is a big group of people, and you could say that they're not physically or in some cases mentally sort of meet the standard of what the model says a participant of social contract should be. It also includes people from foreign countries, especially from disadvantaged countries, people who don't have the same opportunities that people might have in this country. And thirdly, she includes, uh, maybe surprisingly, non-human animals. And so here you see that she's endorsing a kind of consideration of animals, as though animals also have rights along with people. I mean, a position which we've seen, from Peter Singer. So Nussbaum also has a point of view with respect to the liberation of animals, although she comes at her position differently than Peter Singer came to his. Well, one thing I should have mentioned on the previous slide was that when Nussbaum talks about uh, inequalities of in foreign countries, disadvantaged countries, I mean, it indicates the scope of what she's after, the scale of it. And it's not she is interested in reform in our own case, like how we in this country think about these problem areas in society, but she's also interested in a kind of international application of what she feels is a better way to think about the principles uh, of that we're going to base our societies on. So primarily, she endorses, as was mentioned back at the beginning, a capabilities approach. And this is an approach that she gives credit to Aristotle for being the inspiration for. And she, just like Aristotle did, I mean, talked about a number of different requirements, for a just society, for a society that would give people all the opportunities that they need in order to have happy and fulfilling existences. So Nussbaum lists what she believes are the primary human capabilities that we all have simply in virtue of the fact that we're human beings. Uh, and then she asked, what kind of society would enable these capabilities to be exercised if we wanted to? And again, regardless, the capabilities are to be applied to everyone, regardless of physical and mental inequalities. Uh, so this is what she's aiming at on a kind of universal level, as I said, internationally, but also nationally. She claims that this view that she has is based on respect for fundamental human dignity. Just because we're human beings, we all should have the opportunity to develop all these different capabilities that we have so that we can have a rich and complete, fulfilling, flourishing existence, rewarding in all the different ways in which it can be rewarding for us. Again, respect for human dignity implies a society that would provide for a decent human life in all these different areas. And again, like Aristotle, Nussbaum thinks that a number of capabilities should be considered. She makes a list of 10 of them, to be exact. I don't know whether exactness is the point here. And I've provided this list, and if I count the items, they don't add up to 10. I've actually got more than 10. So in some cases, I'm not sure where the divisions are, but I'll give you the list that I have because I think most of these items are included. And she starts with the fundamental capability of life, and that's sort of the first and foremost, the right to life, right to health. I'm calling these rights. But these are also our capabilities, and you say which would include, opportunity for health care, bodily integrity, employment opportunities, development of all the different capabilities that we have, which would include our senses, development of our imagination, our thinking, our ability to think, using our reason in practical ways, practical reason. The ability to have affiliations, including political affiliations. The need to have some opportunity for play and for recreation. The ability to have relationships with others, which would include relationship with animals as well. That means to develop friendships and to have that aspect of your life. That was a big one for Aristotle. And to have a kind of emotional health, to develop your emotions, to have access to political participation, to have that opportunity, and in a number of extents to have control over one's material culture, or at least to have an influence over it. So this is really quite a list, and a number of items, could stand further clarification. But I think we all get the point of where it's going, all the different areas of life where we should be free to develop these and exercise these different capabilities. Again, if we wanted to, some of them, would be up to the individual whether or not they wanted to develop a particular capability. It's an ideal, that what she proposes, it seems to me, it's an ideal to be aimed at. And she would argue that we should do what we can to move in the direction of making this a possibility, so that we all might have this possibility of having a rich and fulfilling existence for ourselves. One final point should be made here, and that is about the motivation for entering into the social contract, or some sort of social contract. As we indicated earlier on when we first presented it's often framed that people join or sign on to a social contract for the sake of mutual advantage. So, and that, everybody's independent and equal and so forth when they sign on to this. But you have to give up something when you sign the contract. So you have to get something out of it. And so she says, but this way of thinking about why we would join with other people would cause some to ask, what's in it for me? Or what do we get out of it if we're going to sign on to such a contract? What's in it for me if we're to care for disabled people, to educate them, and whatever expenses might be incurred in sort of making sure that everybody has equal opportunities? Nussbaum's response to this is that the idea that why we join with others is for mutual advantage is kind of a little reductive, or it's an impoverished idea of why we join with other people. And it's true, sometimes we can join with other people for the sake of some mutual advantage. Everybody gets something from it, but there's other reasons why we join with others, and oftentimes we join with other people for the sake of love. I mean, for positive feelings, or because we care about others. And that motivation sort of has to be included. It's not always going to be the case that there's some sort of uh, checklist or balance sheet, in terms of what it cost you. I mean, to be related to certain people, because there's many different ways in which one can be rewarded as a result of their interactions with other people. And loving people, caring for people, loving mankind even, can be an incentive or motivation to be connected with other people. And ultimately, Martha Nussbaum is more interested in establishing a world of mutual care than one of mutual advantage. And really, when you think about that, that's in her view at least, that would be a world which is more in keeping with the dignity of everybody involved. So that seems to be a worthwhile goal.